Okay, to start, can you just tell us a little bit about your journey? What led you to become a dietitian focused on women's health? Let's just start there.
So, first, I love that question. Thank you so much for having me and introducing me to your audience. I'm super grateful to be here and be in conversation with you. So, it's actually a very funny story. I was training for the Boston Marathon, and
Okay.
it still makes me laugh to this day. So, first, like, Chelsea, first things first, like, I did not qualify. Like, I just want to clarify, I was running for a charity. I love running, but I was running for charity. And this was like 2005. My running partner and I were just not doing a great job of the training. And when I say that, like, she ended up in the hospital twice,
Oh my.
once for being overhydrated and once for being underhydrated. So it was like too much sodium in the system, not enough sodium in the system. And then I lost like 15 or 20 pounds unintentionally. I was a vegetarian at the time and I was just like always hungry. I'd get to mile 8 and be like, when can I have falafel? We were doing it, but like
Yeah.
we needed some guidance. And so I was like, I'm going to Google nutrition for runners. And I Googled nutrition for runners. And I was like, oh, there's a certificate program. I'm going to do the certificate program so I can be a better runner. And I remember talking to my dad and saying, hey, listen, I found this certificate that I'm going to do because I'm going to be a really good runner. And he was like, why don't you go for the terminal degree? And I was like, perhaps not the terminal degree, as in like a PhD, but maybe I'll look at like a master's program. And so I actually ended up going back to school
Wow.
because of running. So
That's
running
crazy.
literally brought me to nutrition.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
amazing. So I want to take all of your knowledge and then let's talk about it specifically to women who are in this mid stage of life. So mid 30s up until your 50s, going through perimenopause, menopause, and let's talk about nutrition for them specifically. Talk to me about the science of how diet can impact our hormones, either negatively or positively.
Yeah. So this is something that I've been talking about for a long time. We're super
Okay.
focused on our external, like how we look. And that's valid. That's like an entry point for sometimes people. People will come to me and they're like, I just want better hair.
Mhm.
And I'm like, all right, super. Let's talk about the vitamins and minerals that you're consuming. But when people are going through the menopausal transition, this is a time, especially in the peri or pre-peri stage, where I really like to talk to people about the so unsexy blood pressure, blood sugar, and cholesterol. And it sounds like, oh my gosh, what a bore. But the truth is, those are among the variables and bone health that we start to see shift when people get into that peri and then as they're going through that transition into menopause. And the reason that I tend to focus on blood pressure, blood sugar, and cholesterol is because what we put on our plates, how we interact with food, how we navigate stress, sleep, and movement all have an impact on what those numbers are in like all decades of life, but really in the third and fourth decade, and then can be major informers for what's going to happen in the fifth decade and beyond.
Okay.
And so if we start to say, we're going to start to think about a pattern of eating that is super rich in plants, super rich in antioxidants, lean proteins, omega-3 fatty acids, our beans, our nuts, our seeds. And then we're going to think about kind of the proportions they show up on our plate, how often we're eating them. Then I say, all right, now we're talking about stable blood sugars, we're talking about level blood pressure, and we're talking about keeping your lipid profile in balance. As we go into the peri stage, because there's the decrease in those hormones, the progesterone, the estrogen, and the testosterone, and we start to see that shift in body composition, there's a little bit less lean body mass, meaning that our muscles, we don't have as many. We've got to work harder to keep them. There's also a slight increase, or can be for many people, in visceral fat. So that's that fat that we start to see around the central region. And that I refer to as being the metabolically active fat, because that's kind of what is like signaling these variables that I was talking about.
Okay.
And so when we see that decrease in lean body mass and the increase in the central adiposity and visceral fat, then I start to say, all right, we've really got to double down on the blood sugar, the blood pressure, and the cholesterol. That's why I say in that 30s, that's that time when we really want to start thinking about what's on my plate, how am I interacting with food, so that we can get a handle on those variables before we enter into that peri stage.
I love that. You just answered so many of my questions all in one go. And I'm like, okay, yeah, amazing. I want to talk about blood sugar, all of those changes you just mentioned and the shifting hormones, the way our body like processes food begins to change, right?
Yes. Oh, it's interesting. So here's the thing, Chelsea, that I like to remind people. It's not like a switch gets flipped overnight.
Okay.
There's so many variables. Think back to like young Chelsea when you were 12 or 13.
Mhm.
Were you active? Did you fidget? Were you like on a sports team? Were you moving around a lot? Maybe, or actually, maybe I should ask you. So, what were you doing when you were 12 or 13?
Yep. I was a real active little gal, dancer. So, yeah, I had something going on at all times.
Exactly. Now, fast forward to
Yeah.
Chelsea now, right?
Yeah. Yesterday, I said to my husband, like, this is the most sedentary I've ever been.
And I just use that because I could say the same thing for young
Yeah.
Maya. I was like everywhere. I mean, I told you running marathons brought me to nutrition. Like I ran my last marathon when I was doing my rotations to become a dietitian. So we're talking about like a solid 13 years ago, right? I mean, I do run,
Yeah.
but I'm not doing those long distances. So the reason I bring kind of our shift in movement up is because when we're 12 and 13, we're also still in a phase of growth, meaning that we actually require more energy because we need it to go toward our growth and development. So we have the requirement for needing more energy, plus we're moving, which means we need to really take in protein, fats, and carbs, our macronutrients. We need our micronutrients and our trace minerals. Like we've got to get them in at a certain caloric intake. Once we get to the phase where we stop growing, for many of us, we don't actually shift our eating patterns. In fact, the older we get, for many people, we actually become gainfully employed and we begin to make more money.
Mhm.
And as people become more affluent and have access to more disposable income, we often choose richer foods. And when I say richer foods, I mean foods that have like a higher energy density. And there's more celebration meals because we can engage in celebrating, and we should 100%. But our entire relationship with how we eat shifts as we get older. I have so many patients that I work with that will Friday and Saturday night, I live in New York City, they'll go out and have an amazing dinner, as they should. They should totally be taking advantage of the city and all the restaurants and doing all the things. That's great. So for some of us, our movement also becomes more sedentary, as I was saying, right? So it's like we continue to have the same kind of energy density that we're taking in. We're moving less. We might also inadvertently be consuming a little bit more salt, a little bit more fat, and a little bit more added sugars. I want to be crystal clear. I'm not shaming anybody for the consumption of that stuff, but I'm saying from a metabolic perspective, if we're really thinking about what's happening internally, when those foods shift from being once in a while to much more often, it also means that our body has more exposure to added sugars, saturated synthetic fats, and added salts. And when we have more exposure to those nutrients, then that's when we start to see the transition. And that's exactly why around midlife, we start to hear more people saying, oh my goodness, suddenly I have pre-diabetes, or oh, wow, I have high cholesterol, or my blood pressure is starting to go up a little bit. Because these things, there's an incubation period. We're talking about 5 to 10 years of more and more exposure, plus an environmental shift, plus a lifestyle shift. And then when you hit that midlife and you're really in that taking care of young kids, taking care of yourself and your partner, taking care of your older parents, now it's also an emotional and stressful pressure cooker. So you've got the nutrition component, you have the movement component, you have the environmental component, and then you have the socio-emotional component and the spiritual component. So there are all of these things coming together. And when they start to go out of balance, we see it reflected in our bodies. Like the body really does, it keeps the tally.
Yeah.
And so we start to see it. And that's why we talk about women's health. So many of these things start to get diagnosed between 45 and 55 because there's been this runway leading up to it.
That makes so much sense. It is easy because those things happen so gradually. It is easy to all of a sudden be like, what just happened? And it feels like that did happen overnight, right? Because you're like, well, I didn't change anything. But really, yes, we have been just slowly doing that.
And the other thing too, Chelsea, that I have to say is like, I always remind women, like, this is not a place where we're placing blame. We're not saying that anyone's at fault because we're just reflecting societal norms. It becomes normal to go on date night every Friday, right? Because otherwise, how would we have time to spend with our partners? My husband and I, we go to our local restaurant and we sit together and we talk and we have a cocktail and an appetizer. That's completely healthy behavior.
Yeah.
It's wonderful for our relationship. And I'm not placing a value on it. I'm just saying it becomes a behavior that's repetitive.
Yeah.
And so if that's what you're doing, then what does the rest of your life look like?
Okay, that makes sense. Talk to me about carbs. You're really a proponent. Carbs are not bad, but we are getting such mixed information out there, and a lot of people at this age, once you are noticing those things, you're kind of like, welcome to some extremes to get where you want to be.
So this goes back to the carb conversation it ties so perfectly into what I was talking about around behaviors and habits. We have been accustomed to the idea that when you sit down, the portion and the serving size, it's usually quite large, right? Like I can't tell you how many things I see on TikTok or Instagram where people went out to a nice restaurant and they're like, well, I'm going to have to eat again because they say the portions were too small. We've become accustomed to having really large portions.
Okay.
And for most of us, our body actually has a hard time dealing with the large portions. Carbohydrates, case in point. I told a patient earlier today, we were talking about Ezekiel toast, which is like this big. It's like literally, It's so small. And I was like, that's actually the serving size. And so we had a really good chuckle about it. But the truth is that when we think of carbohydrates, if we were closer to having a serving with breakfast, lunch, and dinner, it's actually not as much as we think it is.
Okay.
Because if you have a piece of toast that is that big, it's actually not a gigantic portion. It's just that usually if we go out and we get a sandwich, and no shame again, it's like 6 inches or it's 12 inches. And that is multiple servings, but we're accustomed to having that. And we're accustomed to having that on the plate. So then when someone says, hey, carbs are not bad, people are thinking, so I can have a 12-inch sub. And I'm saying, well, a 12-inch sub is multiple servings of whatever is in there, including the bread. What we're saying is carbohydrates are your brain's preferred source of energy. Carbohydrates are protein sparing because you move your body and you exercise and you replenish with carbs. You don't actually break down your own lean body mass to be used as energy. So what we're saying is become carbohydrate literate.
Okay.
Become the person who understands that if you have a serving of rice, whether or not it's white, brown, black, or red, and those all do exist, I didn't make them up, then those are vehicles to add beans, vegetables, lean proteins, nuts, seeds to your plate. So you're not having 3 cups of rice, you're having a quarter to maybe a third of a cup of rice. And that's a very different way of looking at carbohydrates. So we have to kind of come to this. I encourage us to take a look at how we interact with food, but not from a restrictive lens. And part of the thing that happens is when we eat closer to what our body needs, many people feel like, oh, they're on a diet. And that is when we start to get into really tricky territory, because then it's like, well, wait a second. We're not talking about dieting. What we're talking about is creating a pattern of eating that's inclusive of foods that are culturally relevant, heritage foods, and everybody has it. I have patients from Eastern Europe who we talk about, how do we get some of your foods back onto your plate? How do you have those foods? How do you have plants on your plate? And those are carbohydrates too. So how do you have that plate be reflective of all food groups in the portions that actually serve you on a metabolic and cellular level without dieting being at the forefront?
I like that. My mind also wants to go to processed sugar. I just want to ask you about it, because not only am I noticing it in my life, and I think other women in midlife, it comes to like that mid-afternoon time, and it's like your body just is craving some sugar. But I'm also noticing it with my kids. Like it's in everything. Like it's just in everything.
Yeah. So added sugar, you're right. This is hard. I had this conversation the other day with a colleague, and we were talking, and we got like really intellectual, but we were talking about socio-cultural shifts, meaning we've come to a place where we don't tend to live intergenerationally anymore. And you might be like, well, what does that have to do with nutrition? It has to do with the fact that like many families don't have extra familial support of someone to either help take care of their kids, help clean the house, help prepare food. And many families have adults that work at least one job, sometimes two, to put it together. And now we're entering into a period where many families are going to be just straight up struggling to get like really nourishing food on the table. And I think that that socio-cultural shift has really opened the door for the rise in foods that have high amounts of added sugars, fats, and salts, moving from the periphery to the center of what families consume for a multiple, like many reasons. One, they're very accessible. They're widely accessible. Two, they're widely affordable. Like you can go into rural communities and find those foods. You can go into urban communities and find those foods. You can go into poor communities and find those foods. You can go into affluent communities and find those foods. This is an everybody experience. It's not unique to one subset of the population. And so the other challenge with it is that the responsibility and the onus now falls back on the family to actually make a shift away from that. But what if the family doesn't have the emotional bandwidth, the financial flexibility, the nutrition knowledge, the health literacy to actually navigate the grocery store and get the foods that don't have tons of added sugars, tons of added salts, tons of saturated fats, and are tasty? Because the other thing is we've got to feed our kids.
Right.
And so I'm with you, Chelsea. It becomes a real challenge of how do you make the nutritious choice be the tasty choice be the accessible and affordable choice
Mhm.
without making food the total center and end all be all of what the adults are thinking about day in and day out.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, I love that. Okay, I would be remiss if we didn't talk about protein because, if you're a woman in perimenopause, you are talking about protein
Totally.
and trying to inhale, 110 grams of it a day, and it's a full-time job.
So true. Proteins has a very good publicist, like a super, super good publicist.
It's the pickleball of foods. It's
Oh my gosh, it's totally the pickleball of foods. And then it's like a fiber maxing is like CrossFit.
yeah.
Like they're just there neck and neck. Like, I don't know. Like,
Who's gonna win?
yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
So I think two things about protein. Like 100%, yes, we absolutely do need to consume sufficient amounts of protein so that we can help to spare our lean body mass. That's our muscles. And especially if we're high movers or exercisers, we definitely want to make sure that we're taking in sufficient amounts of protein. Here's the kicker. It doesn't mean that tomahawk steaks become the center of what we eat. And I say that because we've gone from protein can be seafood, it can be beans, it can be nuts, it can be seeds. You can include some of the ancient grains that have the full amino acid profile, and that can be a protein, to really going back to high quantities of red meat. And the
Mm.
challenge there is that number one, it's super expensive for most people. And number two, our body needs to have fiber. It needs to have vitamins and minerals. We need the phytonutrients. And so we actually need a balance. I tend to tell women in midlife who are going through perimenopause or in the premenopause stage, maybe start with 1 gram of protein per kilogram of body weight. And if you're compelled to go higher, please work with a registered dietitian. Talk to them so that they can help you balance what those proteins are, so that it's not just high quantities of red meat. The other thing that I say is, for some people, if you're really moving and you're moving multiple days of the week, at a high intensity and duration, then maybe you could go for 20 to 25 grams of protein at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And again, vary the types of protein that are coming in. You want to make sure that if you're going higher protein, that you're modifying the other macronutrients that are coming in. So if you go higher on the protein, you don't also want to be consuming high fat. You want to make sure that if you're going higher on the protein, you're choosing your unsaturated fatty acids, so things that are not solid at room temperature, and that you're going moderate on that, and that you're also making sure that you're meeting your recommended intake for fiber. So that's you're going to aim for 25 to 30 grams of fiber per day. And then you might be able to play with the ratios, but really reach out to a registered dietitian in your area and have them help you figure out what's good for your body, so that you're also thinking about the blood pressure, the blood sugar, and your cholesterol as you're kind of modifying your macronutrient intake.
Mhm. One of the things that I've heard you discuss on your social media, and I'm embarrassed to say it's something I had not put on my radar, but was just heart health and the importance of that. And I should be. My dad actually died of a heart attack, and so yeah, it should be on my mind. But talk to us about that. Why is it important, and what can we do?
Absolutely. And I'm so sorry to hear about your dad.
Thank
Lift
you.
up his name, honor him. So thanks for bringing him into the conversation.
Thank you.
Of course. So it's interesting for women going through midlife. One of the things that we know is that estrogen has this protective nature when it comes to cardiovascular health.
Okay.
And as estrogen decreases, we say that there's an increased risk of developing cardiovascular disease. Around this time of midlife, we start to see women with a little bit more higher cholesterol. They may start to present with the LDL, which is your bad cholesterol. We might start to see that slightly elevated. We might start to see some of the triglycerides trending up. And this is an opportunity to actually say, okay, how can I increase my fiber? Because fiber is involved in helping to remove cholesterol from the body. And so we're trying to think about how do you vary the types of fiber that you're consuming. So everything from your prebiotic fibers. So those are things that go through your digestive tract undigested. They ferment further down in your colon, and they do this great work of creating short chain fatty acids that are so beneficial for the health of the microbiome. And then there's also fibers, like so things like beta glucans that are found in oats, and those are the types of fiber that help to reduce your cholesterol. So we want a wide variety of fibers coming from a ton of sources. That's super important for both gut and cardiovascular health. We also want to think about really modifying how the fats that we're consuming are entering. So if we find that we're having more butter, then maybe we want to start to include plant-based sources. This is where you do like your olive oil, you do your I love a pumpkin seed oil. I have it on my counter at all times. I finish a salad with it. It's super dark green. I've even been known to put it on a little bit of yogurt. I love pumpkin seed oil. Full disclosure, it's wildly expensive. And yeah, you're probably going to have to order it online, but it is delicious. So you're thinking about switching to the mono and polyunsaturated fatty acids. So those are the ones that are liquid at room temperature, reducing your saturated fat intake. And then, of course, for me, I love to talk to people about your polyphenols. This is where we start to see things like your berries. And there's the blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, grapes. There's so much great research on including those things in your pattern of eating and how they're just really beneficial for cardiovascular health. So when we think about heart health, it actually perfectly lines up with this conversation around women's health, because for women, it's like as soon as we start to have that decline in estrogen, our risk begins to increase. So yeah, I love that you brought that up.
Great, great. I want to go back to something that you were talking about, which you had a term for it and now I've lost it, but it was basically like including foods from our culture and our heritage.
Yeah.
Why is that important and how can we do more of that?
Totally. So yeah, beloved and comfort foods. So I love that, especially when there's like stress and duress and it's like kind of a rough moment.
Yeah.
We're taught to like not engage in emotional eating, and then we feel all sorts of shame around it.
Right.
And I'm like, what if we were like, once in a while, I'm going to have that thing that my grandmother made that was like a celebration food, and I'm going to sit down and enjoy it. And it's going to be like a warm hug, and I'm just going to love it. And so I really think that there's absolute space to have those foods show up on our plates as they were meant to be once in a while. And again, it's like really, they don't become the everyday food, but they're the once in a while food. And as I've talked to patients, I have found that many of those foods, Chelsea, tend to be super rich in antioxidants, polyphenols, like they have a lot of fiber, they're like plants. So for the most part, those things actually do love your body as much as your mind loves them. And so I also think that it's another way for people to not feel shame around food, because there's so much in wellness where it's like, you have to eat this way and then you're good. And if you eat that way, then you're bad. That's not doing any of us any favors. What we want is like a moderate pattern of eating that really supports our whole body health, and then also is joyful, because if it becomes a chore, nobody wants to do it.
Incredible. This is the best take on nutrition. We've had so many guests come on and I really like what they say and it's great, but like I'm always listening and thinking, I can't do that. Like,
Right.
it's
Right.
just, it's not feasible in my lifestyle. It feels completely like you're just cutting out. Everything's about cutting out.
Right. And for most of
So,
us, we don't succeed. And if we're constantly in the I didn't do good, then we're just like, well, forget it because I'm not doing good anyway. And what I hope for your listeners, and especially for the people that are trying to grapple with how do I make choices that are sustainable, is like, what's the low hanging fruit that you can engage in? Like, is there one more fruit, one more vegetable, one more whole grain that you can add to your shopping cart and add to your routine? Because if we
mm,
go from the I'm adding things, then that actually takes up space that we want it to take. And so it's like low hanging fruit is still fruit and it's still good fruit.
that's perfect. I wondered if you could give us a little bit of like some practical tips. Let's say you've got someone, their habits, their eating, it's just kind of gotten out of hand and they're hearing this and they're like, okay, this is sustainable. How do you kind of start? What are some practical ways like you could just kind of get your eating on track starting tomorrow?
So this is going to take a little bit of homework. The
Okay.
first thing that I recommend is to do a refrigerator, freezer, and pantry survey. You've got to know what's in your home if you're going to do a reshape of what's coming into your home. Once you do a survey, then you're like, okay, you never throw away food. You can give it away if you want, but don't throw it away.
Okay.
No food waste, right? I'm not saying you have to eat everything on your plate. You can go in the compost. But so once you survey what you have, then you make a new pantry list of what you want to come in. So let's say you want to have more plants in your freezer, more plants in your pantry, and more plants in your refrigerator. Then it's like, what are the frozen vegetables that I need to purchase? What are the frozen fruits that I need to purchase? And if you're going to buy those frozen vegetables and frozen fruits, I do recommend, if you want green beans, that you buy green beans. And that's what it is, right? I understand there's a use case for the combination things, but if you're trying to do like a reframe, then we're going to restock and you're going to add some of those in. If you want mixed vegetables, by all means, go for it. Then you start to say, okay, I'm going to go into the center of the grocery store. I know we're taught to go on the perimeter, but I'm going to say you're going to go into the center of the grocery store because that's where you're going to get all your deals and your shelf stable things. So, are there beans that you like? What kind of grains do you like? And can you branch out on your grains? If you're a white rice family, would you consider a wild rice? Would you think about adding in a quinoa or a couscous or maybe even like a farro or a bulgur? Can you diversify the grains that you bring into your pantry? That diversification is going to change the fiber content, it'll change the B vitamin content, and it'll change the iron content. So just by playing with and experimenting on the grains, you're going to actually expose your body to different minerals, vitamins, which are fantastic.
Mm.
And then this is a huge one. People eat pasta. I'm never going to say give up your pasta, but I am going to say, can you think about what's going to go into your sauce? So you get your pasta that you like. And if you are comfortable getting a lentil pasta or a chickpea pasta, by all means do so. There are brands that have gorgeous formulations that are
Yeah.
just so delicious. And if you like it, add it. And then think about, okay, this pasta is now a vehicle for more vegetables, the same way that the grains are a vehicle for beans and vegetables, or lentils or legumes or whatever in vegetables. So go through the center of the grocery store and begin to get those pantry items. You can make a list. If you can do it all in once, fantastic. If you need to do it over multiple trips, also fantastic. But start to diversify what you have in your pantry so that when you put a meal together, it is now super nutrient dense. And then lastly, go into the frozen food section. And this is where you actually look for the better for you options. So the brands that are really engaged in not having too much added salt. They're being conscious about the saturated fat. They're being conscious about the added sugar. And the reason that I actually encourage people to put those into their freezer is because on the nights when you're like, oh, I'm just going to do whatever, you actually have a better for you option in your freezer that
Mm,
can be ready in under 5 minutes.
mm.
And for so many busy families, that's the difference between like just mindlessly ordering in and intentionally going out for a family meal at a restaurant that you guys care about.
Incredible. Great tips. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. Yeah. I loved that. I loved having you here. You were so informative. I feel like this was really helpful. How can listeners find you and work with you or follow you?
Yeah, so you can find me across social at Maya Feller RD. I spend most of my time on Instagram, and we are accepting new patients at Maya Feller Nutrition. I have a team of amazing registered dietitians. We accept some insurances, so you can reach out to us through the website, mayafellernutrition.com, to find out about working one on one or joining our groups. And we're super excited to take care of folks.
Thank you so much for being here. I loved it.
Thank you for having me. Such a good conversation.